Hi everyone, Chris Tuck here, survivorsofabuse.org.uk. So this video that I want to do with you today is about raising awareness, it's about educating, and it's about all of us, especially parents or caregivers, to be more vigilant when it comes to our children and young people being online. Now, being online is their life now, so we can't change that. We have to work with it. So what I'm going to share with you today is not a one-off. It's not a rarity. It happens every single day, and it is happening more and more. So we all have a duty of care to our children and young people to make sure they don't fall prey to this, to make sure that they are aware of the consequences of being online, to enable them to feel and be safer in all of their digital communications and going on all of these digital platforms. So this is a program on BBC Two and it's called Tracking a Paedophile. Now, I would urge you to go and watch this program. But if you don't want to watch the programme, I'm going to give you my summary of what went on in the programme and some points of concern, and to just let's continue this conversation outside of this particular video. So, to set the scene, a dad calls the West Midlands Police stating that a 20-year-old man had been sleeping with his daughter. His daughter is 12 years old. The dad confirmed that the last sexual contact between his daughter and the alleged perpetrator was a few weeks ago, but his daughter was planning on meeting the alleged perpetrator again imminently. Now, the programme then cuts to DC Corinne Haton. She said she'd been working in child sexual abuse and exploitation in that team for 8 years. And she said she has dealt with hundreds of cases of children and young people from all different backgrounds and walks of life being groomed and sexually abused and exploited online. Now, in her ABE or VRI, because it's known as those two things, the victim shared that she had been groomed and raped. The alleged perpetrator had been connecting with her. Now, let's call this girl Lucy because it's easier and it brings home, really, that the victim is a person, is a 12-year-old girl. So we'll call her Lucy. So he had been connecting with Lucy via Snapchat. The perpetrator, Luke, and that is his name, by the way, told the victim that he was 15 and would Lucy like to meet up with him. Luke had told Lucy he had iPhones, drugs and nicotine. On their first meetup, they sat in his car and Luke told Lucy he was actually 19 and apologised for lying to her. He gave her a vape but said she had to give him something in return. Lucy said she was skint and being 12 she would be. Luke said that's not what he wants sex. Luke then pushed Lucy out of the car, pinned her to the car and choked her. Lucy told him she didn't like it and she started to cry, and this is when he raped her. So this is Lucy's testament, her evidence in her ABE or her VRI. Now, I'm really sorry if this level of detail is hard for you to hear, but just imagine what it's like for Lucy. and just take a second, because Lucy could be your daughter, or she could be a young person that you may know. So don't think that just because Lucy is not your daughter or not connected to you, that this doesn't affect you, because it may well do. I hope to God it never does, but let's just be very, very aware here that this is happening every single day. Like I told you, that's what DC Haton has said. Now, we cannot live in denial anymore that child sexual abuse and exploitation, either online, offline, i.e. in person, is not prevalent, that it's not a problem, that it's not an endemic within our society, because it is. As a society, you, me, we all need to wake up that this is an everyday threat to our children and young people, especially in their everyday digital world. Now, DC Haton said, child abuse has always existed, and as victims and survivors, myself included, and many people that I know are included within that, we know the impact of child sexual abuse. DC Haton goes on to say, with the use of social media and the digital age, it's made gaining access to children far easier. So in our investigations, we have to use digital forensics to build the case and solve the crime. So as you might be aware, I'm going to be going in and out of Lucy's testimony that she gave to the police, and also what the officers on the case have done and are saying, because that is the point of conversation that we all need to be picking up on and having more debate, discussion around how to better protect our children and young people online. Now, Lucy had to give her phone to the police for examination. Dan Coley, the digital forensics officer, said his workload has changed a lot in the last decade, and now 75% of his workload is child abuse material. I'll let that sink in just for a moment. Dan goes on to say, you can be anyone online. Often perpetrators pretend to be young people when in fact they are adults. And this is the case in point. This is the case of Lucy, the victim, 12 years old, and Luke, a man of 28. Dan says digital tech has given perpetrators the platform to commit their crimes and abuse children. So they go online, they pretend they're young, they build a rapport with their potential victim, i.e. it's called grooming. Yeah. They promise them this, that and the other. They will then potentially meet in person, and that is where the grooming, the gifts, the coercion, the manipulation, and then the threats will come. And this case clearly explains the grooming process. Now, the suspect, Luke, had been using an unregistered SIM, and Lucy only knew Luke by his online aliases. And this is the issue. Parents, caregivers, we need to make sure that the children and young people that belong to us or that we know of, that they actually know the people that they're speaking to try and better protect them online. Lucy shared that she'd met with Luke 5 or 6 times between September and December, so it was a very short window. She had last met with him 2 weeks prior and asked him if he could stop. In that meeting, he returned to his car and left her there on the spot, and she said she was physically shaking because she was so scared. Lucy was able to provide a description of Luke and his car and part of the number plate. DC Haton checked the police databases with that information, and she was able to identify him. And as I said, Luke, the owner of the car, was actually a 28-year-old man. The police did a dawn raid on the suspect, and his name, Luke Cassidy. They arrested him for rape of a child under 13 and intent to supply drugs. The police took 2 phones that belonged to him, but he refused to surrender the pins to the phones. So the phones had to be sent to digital specialists who will then, and did, break into those 2 devices. Luke's car was seized and examined for evidence. Because the sexual contact between Luke and Lucy was more than 2 weeks, there was no forensics available from Lucy herself. So the special officers looked for DNA evidence in the car to try and prove that Lucy was actually in the car or had been in the car, and to try and find any proof of sexual activity, i.e. rape. They found a white hair bobble in the car, and all of this evidence was sent off to forensics for examination. Now, in the car as well, large quantities of Class B cannabis drug was found in gummies the sweets. Now, when Lucy's phone was examined, they were looking for communications between her and Luke. Dan, the forensics officer, looked at the call logs on Lucy's phone and all of her social media. He was looking to see if Luke knew Lucy's age. He was looking for communications of a sexual nature. He checked for deleted conversations, but unfortunately at that time there was nothing compelling to be found. The forensics in the car showed multiple DNA results. Luke's DNA was present, but not Lucy's. Police, though, were very concerned about the other DNA and were asking, are there any other victims? Now back to DC Haton. She states that perpetrators often isolate the child victim, and this will silence them from speaking out and or speaking up. And this is borne out in Lucy's interview. She said that Luke knew her passwords to everything. He hacked her account and removed all of her boy mates' phone numbers and details. So there's the isolation. Luke then bombarded Lucy with calls and texts and asked her if she had enjoyed that. He wanted her to love him, marry him one day, and make a porn video with her. Lucy told him she didn't like it and she didn't want to. Luke then replied, well, you have to now because you're dating me. If you do not keep this relationship, I'm going to burn your house down. I will kill you and your family. And this is exactly the grooming process. Exactly. Befriending, gifts, love, and then when they don't get what they want, threats. DC Haton says Luke used classic grooming on Lucy. He was familiar with her. He was friendly towards her. And then he became threatening in his behaviour to get what he wanted and to continue with what he wanted. She said he is a very dangerous man. Now, part of the police investigation, they went back to the sites of the alleged rapes and they were looking for CCTV, but there was nothing. So far we've got Luke not making sure that there was no forensics within his car, that his phones were burner phones, that he deleted information from even Lucy's accounts because he hacked them. Yep. He took her to places where there was no CCTV around. So this guy knew what he was doing. Digital investigation of the car's in-house sat-nav showed where Luke had travelled to. And there was one match from all of those postcodes. So that was good potential supporting evidence in this particular case. Now, let's fast forward to the interview with Luke. Luke prepared a statement stating that he knew Lucy. They had met on Snapchat 2 to 3 times. He drove her in his car to various locations. He denied he had told her he was only 15. He claimed Lucy said she was 16 and that he had consensual sex with Lucy. He then said, "I submit this statement because I have autism, which affects my memory, and I have additional mental health problems." And then Luke claimed he didn't feel well enough to answer any questions. Your heart bleeds, doesn't it? It really goes out to him. DC Haton said she wanted to ask further questions and she had conversations around Luke's mental health, and it was deemed that Luke was fit to be interviewed. Now, all questions put to Luke regarding Lucy's age, giving her gifts, grooming her, or the threats made to her, all he said was, "No comment, no comment, no comment." Anyway, long and short, he was charged with rape of a child under 13 because of his own statement. He was then remanded in prison whilst the investigation continued. Now, let's go back to Luke's phones. The expert couldn't get into one of the phones. They were fake iPhones. But the expert was able to extract the data from both of the phones, and very sexualized conversations were found on those phones. Indecent images of children were found on those phones. A conversation about a victim's age was clearly found on those phones. Now, whilst this investigation was ongoing, another non-recent case came to light, and it was another young girl, aged 13, that Luke had propositioned sexually. The police investigated that further. Before taking all of this evidence to the CPS, the police went back to interview Luke in prison. And guess what? He offered no comment to all of his questions. But on the mobile phone of the second victim, the expert found sexualized conversations on the Snapchat account. All of this information was passed to the CPS. The program then fast tracks. Luke's trial lasted for 6 days. He pled guilty to 1 count of rape and possession with intent to supply Class B drugs. He pleaded not guilty to 1 charge of online grooming and a further 5 rapes. Guess what, peeps? Justice worked in this case. He was found guilty of all 8 charges. And guess what? Justice was served in this case. He got 20 years. And as of June 23, so right now, the police have uncovered 14 more potential victims. So that is the case of Luke and Lucy. Lucy is a made-up name. That's the name I've given this victim because it's just easier to talk about her. This is a programme on BBC Two called Tracking a Paedophile. So even though the grooming took place online, the actual sexual abuse took place offline, in person. So we're going to find that there are some cases that happen all online, the sexual abuse and the sexual exploitation, because children and young people may have been groomed to upload nude pictures of themselves or doing sexual acts to themselves, whatever the scenario is. So it could all be online. However, it's still child sexual abuse and exploitation, okay? Or it could be hybrid, like I've just explained in this case, or what still goes on, and we know that most sexual abuse happens within the family home environment network. It could be person-on-person abuse, yeah? None of it's right, as we know, and all should be prosecuted. But more and more, because of the digital age and the technology and the platforms and us older people not understanding the actual dangers of our children and young people being online, they are more at risk. Yeah, more at risk. So we need, and if you can imagine, right, if a child is growing up in an unloving, uncaring and dysfunctional household, yeah, they're going to be looking for love, nurture, care. They're going to be looking for a sense of belonging. So they're going to be actively seeking. And when someone shows them a bit of attention, a bit of love, a bit of nurture, a bit of care, they're going to go there. So, you know, we just have to think about all of these different scenarios and try and reduce the risk of our children even being faced with any of this. Yeah. So know who your children are talking to, please. Check that all out. I've even come across a case locally where 2 children, teenagers, were talking to a man online, and the mum was very concerned and said, "Do you know him?" And they went, "No, we've just met him online. We're just chatting to him." And the mum went berserk. Yeah. So it's prevalent. We need to make sure that our children and young people are aware of the dangers, are educated, and if anything untoward does happen, that they know that they can come and talk to a safe adult that is going to do something about them, about the situation, about it. Not going to penalise the child or young person, because it's not the child or young person's fault that this is happening to them. Yeah. And they won't open up and share what is going on if we go at them and say, well, you know, you shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing that. That won't help. That won't work. So educate your children, make them aware. Yeah. And if anything untoward does happen, hopefully they will have the courage and know that they will be supported in any disclosures that they make to you. Yeah. So any questions?